That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, in this video, we are going to be going through. We are going to be looking at a receiver that just changed teams. So we have some, really new variables to think about. And we are going to be talking about why he will fail on his new team. And not only why he will fail on his new team, but what you can actually expect to get for him in trades. I went out to Twitter. I said, hey, please let me know if y'all have seen any trades with this receiver. I went over to Locals, asked the same exact thing. And of course, y'all know you can always decide to join the flock over there on Locals. And I'm sure that y'all noticed down there in the comment section, but we're actually posting our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings and the updates with those rankings to free agency for free this week on Locals. I'll probably make that behind the paywall again on Sunday, but of course you can find that link down in the description of the video. You can find that in the comment section as well. And I think that should be it. Make sure you are subscribed. You've already dropped a like in this video, and you leave a comment letting me know what you think of this wide receiver, because I will be the first person to admit I am very biased when we look at this player. I have said this, I don't know how many times now, but every time I bring up his name, it reminds me how much I love Dynasty Fantasy Football. Like, I have more sentimental value with this receiver than almost any other player in the NFL. And the only reason is I fell in love with the game back in 2014. That's when I decided to spend every single day of the entire calendar year thinking of Dynasty Fantasy Football, looking at those rookies coming into the NFL. And that 2015 offseason, Amari Cooper came in, and there was so much hype around Amari. There was probably more polarization with Amari Cooper in terms of his actual Dynasty value than any other player in Dynasty in 2015, 2016, and 2017. Whatever podcast you pulled up, and trust me, back in those years, I would literally listen to probably 25 Dynasty podcasts a week. It's all I did. Every question would be, what do you think about Amari Cooper? What do you think about Amari Cooper? And I loved the guy, so I will be the first person to admit I've always been too high on Amari Cooper. I'm always getting Amari Cooper wrong, and I think this will be the first year that I am lower than everybody else on Amari, and I'm excited to get into why. But of course, before we look at his current situation, we have to kind of just outline the player Amari Cooper's been over the past 3 years. Of course, he's been in the NFL for a very long time, got drafted in 2015, as we just mentioned, but famously was drafted at an incredibly young age. This is a receiver that was an impact right away his rookie season in Oakland, but at the end of the day, none of that really matters at this point. He's 27 years old. I think we can safely just look at the last 3 years that we had in Dallas. So we're going to be looking at 2019, 2020, and 2021 and try to use that as a baseline of the talent a receiver Amari Cooper is. Now, of course, I want to preface this by saying that this is a completely different situation than what you have in Cleveland. Let's acknowledge the fact that Amari Cooper was playing on a team that had some serious wide receiver talent around him. He was going out there and battling as early as 2019 with Michael Gallup. As soon as CeeDee Lamb got drafted in 2020, we know that CeeDee Lamb was a significant player as well. So Amari Cooper has had way more target competition in Dallas than he will have in Cleveland. But still, I think we're going to be able to normalize these statistics and maybe show you why some people are going to be making the argument that with less competition, he will be able to succeed. And I am coming away with the opposite conclusion. Now, let's take a step back. Let's go back to 2019. 3 years ago, I know it's a while ago, but these statistics, Amari Cooper has been extremely consistent here. Amari Cooper this year averaged about 7.5 targets a game, about 74 receiving yards a game, and half a touchdown a game. And Amari Cooper was fantastic. This was his first full year in Dallas. He was the wide receiver 15 on a per game basis. So Amari Cooper here, high end wide receiver 2. And he's age 24, 25 at this point, probably 25. So that's kind of what you expect with Amari Cooper. He's in his prime, high end wide receiver 2. And with Dallas in particular, what I really want to look at is the situation he was placed in. He was placed into an offense that with Dak Prescott was at the very top of the NFL with their passing production. If we just look at the passing attempts alone from the Dallas Cowboys in 2019, Dallas was second in the NFL with their passing attempts. So if we look at Amari Cooper with these per game numbers, yeah, they're impressive. But what I want to do is I want to change these per game numbers from just his targets per game, where I want to be looking at it from the perspective of the percentage of the offense he was accounting for. That way, we can bump those percentages up when we go over to Cleveland, knowing he'll have less target competition, and we can still see the overall output that we are going to get and how it's changed just based off the volume of the offense alone. So if we're looking at Amari Cooper here, he actually had almost 20% of the team's target share, 19.9%, but we can just call it 20. And he had 24.25% of the team's receiving yards. Now, I know a lot of people, including myself, your initial reaction, trust me, I love Amari Cooper. We want to say, oh, only 20% of the targets, 24% of the yards. That means Amari Cooper is a very efficient player. That means Amari Cooper's great. Keep in mind, he's playing the receiver position. This is going to be very common with every wide receiver you pull up in the NFL, as a target for a receiver is going to be further downfield, is going to generally be more efficient than what you're getting with those targets that are going to running backs, targets that are going to tight ends. So this isn't out of the ordinary. This is not to say, oh, Amari Cooper is so much more efficient than any other receiver. This proves he's elite. It's not to do this at all, but it does give us a baseline of the percentage of the offense he was accounting for in Dallas. Now let's go to 2020. And here, obviously, this is the season Dak Prescott gets injured halfway through. But Dallas still 10th in the NFL with their passing attempts per game. And Amari Cooper, almost an identical season here. 20.3% of his team's target share. That's with CeeDee Lamb coming in. So with the addition of CeeDee Lamb coming in, Amari Cooper's role in this offense doesn't really change in 2020. He also has 69.6 receiving yards per game. That number comes down, but keep in mind, playing with Andy Dalton, of course, that number is going to come down. If we're looking at the percentage of the offense he's accounting for, that number stayed pretty much the exact same, 24.7% of his team's receiving production on a per game basis with the receiving yards. Now, the touchdowns came down as well, 0.31 touchdowns per game, but that's what you expect with Andy Dalton there half the year. So Amari Cooper this season was the wide receiver 18, which is right in line with what you would kind of expect if you only have Dak Prescott for half a year, still in his prime, 26 years old. And one thing that I am so excited to announce, I know we've had a lot of questions just wondering when our official Dynasty research book is going to be out, when y'all are going to be able to go out there and grab that. And it should be, I don't want to put an exact date, should be around March 21st. This weekend, maybe next week, I'll be very excited to make that announcement. Also, we'll have Fantasy Flock Network hats available for anybody who does not have one yet. But nonetheless, let's move on. Let's go a year in advance. Let's go over to 2021, where the Dallas Cowboys, fourth in passing. I know it's a narrative saying, oh, the defense was so good, they generated so many turnovers, Dallas was able to lean on the run a little bit more with the committee of Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. While yes, that's a fun narrative that we can go out there and talk about, while yes, they did run the ball a lot, fourth in the NFL in passing attempts. Like, what are we supposed to say here? You're mad that Dallas was not number one in the NFL with their passing attempts? Fourth, still top five here. And with Amari Cooper, this is the first season he saw that step backwards. Now, what's surprising is Dalton Schultz, yes, played 2 more games, but actually had the same amount of targets this year as Amari Cooper. But here, Amari, 6.9 targets per game, 57 receiving yards per game. These numbers come down to 17% of his team's targets, 20.4% of his team's receiving yards on a per game basis. So this past year, with the Michael Gallup injury, keep that in mind. You had the CeeDee Lamb ascension. You had Dalton Schultz creating a much larger role in this offense. And Amari Cooper fell down to the wide receiver 29. Now, one other thing I want to point out that I think we just got to saying this with that Dynasty research bug. I put in so much research figuring out wide receiver age cliffs, running back age cliffs, tight ends age cliffs, quarterback age cliffs, and when you should expect these players to begin regressing and when the actual prime for these receivers are. And something that I've gotten wrong since 2014, I've been wrong on this, and I've said this on the channel, and I've just been wrong every time I've said it. I used to think that you should expect that wide receiver fall off once you got to 28, 29, 30 years old. And I used to always say, I'm holding these wide receivers till they retire. I think I was just an idiot when it comes to that. I think I was very much wrong. The research proves that is a just completely incorrect statement, where the peak for these wide receivers, and it's almost a linear line down. Of course, maybe I'll send a graph to Thomas to put up in this video. Maybe not. You can find all those graphs, all those charts in our Dynasty research book. But it is actually at age 26. So this is about the point where Amari should be falling off. I mean, age 27 and only getting older from here. So it's interesting to see that Amari Cooper takes a step back. His final year in Dallas, he's a wide receiver 3 on a per game basis. But I know a lot of people are excited because he's getting out of Dallas. He's not having to compete with Dalton Schultz. He's not having to compete with CeeDee Lamb. I know other people kind of understand the situation he's going into. Definitely a lot worse. And I want to go and talk about Cleveland right now, because we can actually look at the percentage of the offense that these receivers accounted for historically, that top receiver in Cleveland, and say, well, if Amari Cooper gets to this mark, what's the production we should expect? Now, one thing I want to address is I know Cleveland's been bad over the past few seasons. And I know we may have some Cleveland Browns fans down there in the comment section telling me that they're going to get better with Amari Cooper. Let me know how Cleveland takes a significant step forward with their passing game production. Baker Mayfield is turning 27 this season. How many quarterbacks are we seeing take that significant step forward their age 27 season? At this point, I think we know who Baker is. I don't think Baker continues to develop. Maybe you want to make the argument that he's slightly better going forward, but you shouldn't expect some drastic change with the Cleveland Browns offense. So let's go through and let's check this out. 2019, they're 20th in pass attempts. Now, this is the highest mark out of this 3-year stretch. So the pass happiest we have seen the Cleveland Browns. Let's look at their top receiver. Keep in mind, this is no Odell Beckham Jr. This is Jarvis Landry, and the second leading receiver on this team is David Njoku. So Jarvis Landry is in this same exact role that Amari Cooper is about to get. Jarvis Landry is the wide receiver 1A, and it's not even close. There's no wide receiver 1B. I misspoke. He's just the wide receiver 1A, and there's a giant drop-off, which is exactly what we're about to see with Amari. Jarvis Landry goes out there, and he commands exactly what you would expect. He gets that elite alpha target share, 25.6% of the targets on a per game basis. 33% of the receiving yards on a per game basis went to Jarvis Landry. That's Devontae Adams level. That's, college receiver level. That's happening in an NFL offense here in 2019. And Jarvis Landry goes out there and he has his second highest career mark with his touchdowns. He has his career high with his receiving yards per game. What does it lead to in the Cleveland Browns offense? It leads to the wide receiver 21. And that's almost best case scenario. That's saying you get over 25% of the team's targets. That's saying you get a third of the receiving production. And that's over the past 3 years where Cleveland's been pass happy that one season compared to the rest. Because we go to 2020. In 2020, they dropped from being 20th in the NFL with their pass attempts per game down to 28th. And here, this is a little bit of a different scenario. Of course, this is the season that Odell Beckham Jr. gets injured in week 7. So at the beginning of the year, you had the wide receiver 1A, wide receiver 1B. You can make the argument which is which. Of course, y'all know I love my guy, Odell. But Odell, during this span, was a high-end wide receiver 4 on a per-game basis. He had one game during the 7-game stretch with over 20 fantasy points. So Odell, we know the story. We'll get to it in a second. Just completely fails the season before the injury. So Jarvis Landry, half the year, he has to split it the first 6 weeks with Odell Beckham Jr., who wasn't really stealing any production. And the second half of the season, right back to where he was, that alpha wide receiver. Jarvis Landry, 21% of the team's targets, 25% of their receiving production, which is very similar to what Amari Cooper was getting in Dallas. Now, What does this lead to? The wide receiver 38 on a per game basis, a wide receiver 4 in fantasy. Now, let's go to the next season. Let's go to 2021. And here, the Cleveland Browns, just like we saw in 2020, and what you should probably expect going forward, at the very bottom of the NFL with their passing attempts per game, sitting at 28. Clearly, this is a team that's going to run the ball, and Jarvis Landry has no target competition. He comes out, gets 23% of this team's target share on a per game basis, which is higher than any mark we have seen Amari Cooper with pretty much at any point his NFL career. And he gets 22% of the team's receiving production. So what you see with Jarvis here is he does take that step down with the efficiency. This is the first time we're seeing Jarvis Landry account for more targets in terms of the percentage of his team's offense than actual receiving production. So Jarvis Landry, while he does finish as the wide receiver 45 this season, I will be the first person to acknowledge that Amari Cooper is significantly better than Jarvis Landry. We saw that Jarvis Landry fall off this year, but can we ignore the fact that Jarvis Landry is out there getting 25% of the team's targets, which is pretty much at most what you can project Amari Cooper for? That's an elite target share for any wide receiver in any offense. 25%. That's what you're praying for you get from your receiver. And this has led to Jarvis Landry. Best case scenario, when Cleveland was more pass happy than we've seen them be over the past 2 years, that led to Jarvis Landry having a low-end wide receiver 2 season. Yet since then, since Cleveland has gone, you know what? We added Kareem Hunt. We got Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, probably the best running back committee in the NFL, probably one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Let's just run the ball. Since then, Jarvis Landry is essentially a borderline wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. So now if we're projecting forward with Amari Cooper, can we be confident that he's going to be much more than that? Now, of course, I'm saying that I believe Amari Cooper is a more talented receiver than what you had with a 25-year-old Jarvis Landry. I'm not saying Amari Cooper is going to be a one-for-one replacement with Jarvis. But what I am saying is we have seen what this alpha role is in this Cleveland Browns offense and how this overall offensive environment will just destroy a receiver. And another great point that we can look at will be what happened with Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, with Odell, as we discussed, before the injury, he was a high-end wide receiver 4 in 2020 on a per-game basis. Then in 2021, now I know locker room, yada, 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 but still, he was a talented receiver in Cleveland. The wide receiver 83 on a per-game basis before he was traded in week 8. The wide receiver 83, he moves to Los Angeles. You would imagine there would be, a little bit of lag for him to actually get on the field and start producing right away. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a pretty good receiver in LA named Cooper Kupp, something along those lines. He's a little bit of a sleeper. I know not many people have heard of him. I think it's actually pronounced Cooper Kupp. I apologize for that one, but nonetheless, Odell becomes a wide receiver 3. So Odell has a better season in half a year with the Los Angeles Rams playing alongside a receiver that's able to get 30% of his team's targets, truly that elite level option, than he was ever able to in Cleveland, despite him playing next to, a subpar talent as a wide receiver 1 in Jarvis Landry. So if I'm taking a step back, I'm looking at Amari Cooper. I'm saying even if he does go over to Cleveland, even if he does get that 27% team target share with the assumption, hey, he's better than Jarvis Landry. He should draw targets at a higher rate than Jarvis Landry. Even if he gets up to 27%, which is way higher than we've ever seen him in his NFL career, this offense, as it's run, cannot provide production for these receivers. It's very similar to why I hated Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round of redraft leagues last year. So now if I'm pulling up my actual rankings, and of course, these are free right now on Locals. Find the link in the description. And thank y'all, of course, for all the support and dropping those likes on the videos. But here with Amari, I recently moved him down to wide receiver 37. I have him in the same tier as Rashad Bateman, Calvin Ridley, Chase Claypool. I have him directly ahead of Christian Kirk, Kadarius Toney, and Hunter Renfrow. I would love to know if you think I am wrong with this ranking. I would love to know how Amari Cooper kind of just bucks this trend because I'm probably viewing him as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 in Dynasty. And if he's a low-end wide receiver 2, I apologize, not in Dynasty, in redraft. I'm saying he's probably a high-end wide receiver 3 just for 2022. And if he's on the decline as is, do I want to be buying into a declining asset that is going to give me wide receiver 3 production? Wouldn't we rather just buy Brandon Cooks at a slightly cheaper price? That's my assumption. Let me pull up that tweet I had and see if anybody's given us some decent Amari Cooper trades to look at. Okay, we have 7 comments on this tweet so far. Yeah, so here's someone trades away Amari Cooper and receives the 110. Honestly, if it's a super flex format with that 110, I probably take the pick. I mean, if we're looking at Amari Cooper compared to some of the rookies we currently have him ranked next to, I have Amari Cooper 2 tiers ahead of Jameson Williams and Jahan Dotson, but in reality, those players are very, very close. And if you think there's a chance that you get someone like Matt Corral at that 110, I'm fine taking the pick, as much as it pains me to say. And our other trade that we can look at, someone says traded him for Dawson Knox in the 209. I think that's about fair value, to be honest. And D. Ridge says Amari Cooper for Hollywood Brown straight up. Give me Hollywood, wide receiver 1 last year while Lamar Jackson was under center. But please let me know if y'all think I was an idiot with this video. Please let me know if you think I missed something. Please go down there. Also, drop that like, subscribe to the channel if y'all have not already. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.